been about 20 years since the North American Free Trade Agreement, and the evidence is very clear. The underlying logic of the US-style free trade agreement is harmful to workers, it's harmful to agricultural workers, it's harmful not only to the US, but particularly to many of our partners that we engage in trade with. It's not that trade itself is bad, and it's not that engagement is bad, but the underlying logic of a neoliberal trade agreement is harmful to workers around the world. So we're going to go into more detail on that this morning with our excellent panel of speakers. I first just wanted to call your attention to this latest issue of the New Labor Forum, featuring an article on the Trans-Pacific Partnership by one of our speakers this morning, Arthur Stamoulis. So we encourage you to subscribe. And I'm going to introduce our three speakers that we have here this morning. First, Arthur Stamoulis is Executive Director of Citizens Trade Campaign, a national coalition of labor, environmental, consumer, and human rights organizations working to stop the expansion of NAFTA-style trade agreements and promote a positive vision for international trade. Started in 1992 in response to the passage of NAFTA, it now has over 12 million members and comprises 20 national organizations and 12 state affiliate coalitions. Arthur speaks and writes frequently on issues of global trade and is the author of an excellent article on our subject today called Trading Away the Future, an analysis of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Celeste Drake is our second speaker. Celeste is the Trade and Globalization Policy Specialist at the AFL-CIO, where she actively monitors negotiations for the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement and the US-EU Free Trade Agreement. She advocates for policies to ensure shared gains from global trade. She also covers issues related to the World Trade Organization, global economic development, manufacturing, and foreign investment policy, serves as the AFL-CIO's primary advocate for labor rights cases under the Generalized System of Preferences and various free trade agreements. She has testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and various House subcommittees, the International Trade Commission, and the Trade Policy Staff Committee. We are also pleased to welcome Kian Frederick, who has recently been named to head up the new Citizens Trade Campaign office in New York City. Kian began a career as a union organizer 20 years ago when she led a strike of her Unite Here Local 100 coworkers and won. She later became the first rank and file member and first woman in her local to be elected to executive office. She has worked on organizing and issue campaigns with Unite Here, AFT, CWA, SEIU, and the National AFL-CIO, and other union locals and community groups in New York and Miami. So we're going to start out this morning with Arthur's going to be speaking to you to give an overview of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, how it came to be, what corporations want from it, and the basic campaign strategy labor community groups are using to address it. Celeste will focus in on the partnership's specific threats to labor and working families, and also give some background on what labor has done to push for a trade policy they could support. And then finally, Kian will speak briefly about the New York congressional delegation and local opportunities to join the campaign. And it's wonderful to see you all. This is such a hugely important issue. I've been working in Asia for the last several years where people have been panicked and talking about this agreement since, for maybe 3 or 4 years. So it's really crucial that we really get the word out as much as we can here in the United States. We're a little behind the game.
You can start the video.
Our concern is what is the impact of this TPP.
TPP está siendo negociado a puertas cerradas.
TPP could mean more corporate influence over my government's economic policy.
TPP could mean that I feel less secure.
TPP could mean that global corporations pit worker against worker in a race to the bottom.
TPP nos haría más difícil organizar a los trabajadores.
TPP could mean fewer work opportunities for local residents.
El TPP significaría menos dinero para cubrir las necesidades de mi familia.
TPP significaría tener medicamentos más caros.
TPP could mean companies write my country's food labels and safety standards.
TPP significaría comida nociva y contaminación ambiental.
TPP is a trade and globalization agreement between 12 countries. And even after negotiations negotiations are finished, more countries can join.
TPP can make it harder to organize workers.
TPP could mean deforestation.
TPP could mean more overfishing.
Le PTP pourrait vouloir dire que notre voix ne sera plus écoutée.
Este acuerdo transpacífico es una gran prueba para las posibilidades futuras de la población mundial.
TPP could mean we lose our voice.
Workers' rights, environmental protection, access to medicines. We urge you to ensure that the agreement will be balanced and centred on people's needs, not simply the needs of corporations.
TPP is going to happen.
TPP va a pasar.
TPP is going to happen unless you do something about it.
TPP será una realidad si no hacemos algo.
Great. I love that video by the AFL-CIO. So thank you, everyone, for being here this morning, for the opportunity to speak with you. Thanks especially to Karen, Louisa, Stephanie, and everyone at the Murphy Institute who made today's event possible. Again, my name is Arthur Stamoulis. I direct Citizens Trade Campaign, which is a national trade coalition. I've been tasked with providing the big picture overview of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And hopefully, in doing that, I will leave you with the impression that the TPP is a big deal for the labor movement and for other progressive movements in New York and throughout the world. I think one of the first things I want to just say is that when we come together across movements, labor and environmental groups and family farm organizations, consumer, student, human rights, other progressive organizations, we have a lot of power. And we actually have a long and remarkable history when it comes to trade of beating back corporate power grabs described as trade agreements. So let's see if I'm doing this. All right. So personally, I got involved in trade justice organizing during the 1999 battle in Seattle, where the movement of movements came together and derailed the millennial round of WTO negotiations. Others of you may have participated in the successful campaigns against the Multilateral Agreement on Investment, the Free Trade Area of the Americas, any of a host of other trade deals that have been beaten back. When we work together, we have beaten back some of the most powerful and well-organized economic interests in human history. And I just wanted to, normally I end my presentations at that point, but I want to start with it today, just so that we all really remember that history, internalize it a little bit, and understand, number one, that we can win on the TPP. And the second reason why I start with it is because it really helps explain the context for the TPP. Because what the TPP is it's an end run around the People's Movement victory at the WTO. For well over a decade now, corporations have been trying to use the World Trade Organization to expand their agenda of more privatization, more deregulation, more liberalization. And ever since '99, thanks in no small part to a lot of great organizing, countries within the WTO have been standing up and saying no. And whereas the WTO ostensibly works by consensus, this has been enough to keep the WTO at an impasse, at a stalemate for, again, well over a decade now. So corporations view the TPP as their way around that stalemate. The TPP allows them to work through their proxy, the US government, to essentially cherry pick the countries that it thinks are most likely to play ball with their agenda, to set the rules of the game governing the global economy among that handful of nations, knowing full well that the impacts that it will have will extend well beyond just those countries directly involved. And if you look at just those countries directly involved, it's nothing to sneeze at. Just the countries currently at the table in the TPP talks, there are Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, the US, and Vietnam. Just those 12 countries together represent approximately 40% of the global economy. So just in and of itself, this would be a huge agreement. But the TPP is also explicitly being negotiated as what's called a docking agreement, meaning that other countries will be pressured to dock on or to join over time. Any APEC nation is already able to, petition the existing TPP countries and ask to be included. And the U.S. Trade Representative has repeatedly said that any country that's willing to, meet the quote-unquote high standards set for the agreement is welcome to join. And already, the Philippines, Thailand, Taiwan, South Korea, Colombia, Costa Rica, even China have talked about joining. So if the TPP were to be enacted, you'd best believe that it's going to get a lot bigger than even the 40% of the global economy it would already cover. Some people have taken to calling the TPP NAFTA on steroids, and I get why we do that. Some people still remember what NAFTA is and know what it means, and that that agreement has been branded in the public imagination much better than any other trade agreement. But for those who've been doing this for a while and have worked on these issues, what the TPP really is China PNTR on steroids, the FTAA on steroids. This is far, far bigger than NAFTA. This is far, far bigger than any trade agreement we've had to deal with in a long time. And the impacts it would have on working families were it to be enacted is magnitudes larger than any trade agreement we've experienced in quite a while. Lest there's any misunderstanding, this is absolutely being negotiated by and for big corporations. After 19 major rounds of negotiations over a period of nearly 4 years now, the Obama administration still refuses to tell the public what it's been proposing for the TPP in our names. And it's required that other countries not release any information to their citizens either, which is a rollback in transparency, by the way, from even the Bush years. The Bush administration published draft text for the Free Trade Area of the Americas. Proposals for the WTO are routinely published online. The TPP is deliberately being kept secret from the public. And while it's being kept secret from the public, meanwhile, the Obama administration has chosen to grant approximately 600 corporate lobbyists representing Walmart, Cargill, Chevron, and lots more, special cleared advisor status that gives them access to the texts. And so if they're not literally writing the U.S. proposals for the TPP, and really there's no reason to suspect that they aren't literally writing the U.S. proposals for the TPP, but if they're not, they're at least looking over negotiators' shoulders and saying, nah, don't do that, try this instead. It's true that some union officials and a small handful of others are also cleared advisors and have access to some of the texts, but they're vastly outnumbered by the corporate interests. And more importantly, they're forbidden from sharing what they learn with their own members or with anybody else. So what we know about the TPP comes not from our own government, but from a handful of leaked documents, first published on our website, and frankly, from one-on-one conversations with negotiators from other countries. So the process behind the TPP, to my mind, is completely corrupt. But let's talk about what this pact would mean in practice. So what's the first thing I want to say about the content of this? I guess one of the things to say is that various countries within the TPP are being promoted as low-cost labor alternatives, especially Vietnam, where the average minimum wage is a third of what it is in China's manufacturing centers. So the TPP is very much a pact for companies that feel that Chinese workers are overpaid. They don't just think that your members are overpaid, they think that Chinese workers are overpaid. And there's no question that if this moved forward, it would negatively affect ongoing organizing efforts in China. And of course, if it's negatively affecting ongoing organizing efforts in China, it's going to negatively affect ongoing organizing efforts in Mexico and in Central America and throughout the world, including, of course, the United States. And Celeste is going to cover the TPP's potential impacts on working Americans in a lot of detail. But since we're at the Labor Forum, I do want to make just a few broad points on this. First, as I said before, this isn't NAFTA on steroids. It's China PNTR on steroids. The AFL-CIO's Executive Council released a statement earlier this year, saying this could cause millions of American job losses if it continues forward on its current course, and that's not hyperbole. The TPP would cost millions of American jobs. The Korea Free Trade Agreement, much, much, much smaller, in just its first year, is estimated to have cost 40,000 American jobs. This is, again, magnitudes bigger, and will spell millions of job losses for American workers. The second point is that we'll certainly see an increase in the offshoring of manufacturing jobs under this pact, but it's not just manufacturing jobs. Vietnam, for instance, is already a go-to source for computer programming for companies that think that China and India are a little too costly. So there's all sorts of service sector jobs that would be offshored if the TPP were to move forward. Third, as bad as this would be for the millions of workers and their families who would be directly experiencing that trade-related job loss, it's not job loss that's going to be the main impact that's felt by American workers. It's going to be the downward pressure on wages and benefits. And so even if you're a firefighter, a home care provider, you're in some profession, there's no way it can be offshored, your family is still going to be affected by this in very real ways. And finally, all this direct job loss, all this downward pressure on wages and benefits, obviously has ripple effects throughout the economy. And I say, oh, 2 minutes, really? Okay, I'm going to skip ahead. And those ripple effects obviously would affect the tax revenue needed for public service jobs. Moving ahead, the TPP is a 29-chapter pact. So not only will it affect jobs, wages, but it has all sorts of goodies for corporations built into it. Wall Street, for example, is very interested in the financial services chapter as a way to handcuff future financial regulations. Big Ag and the so-called life sciences companies are very interested in using the sanitary and phytosanitary chapter and other chapters to head off food safety standards, to head off food labeling standards. The IP chapter, intellectual property, to put it simply, is a gift for big pharma and would be a disaster for public health throughout the world. The leaked text shows that the U.S. is pushing to expand medicine patents beyond their current 20 years, which, if you look at a disease like HIV, a patented, monopoly patented medicine can easily cost over $10,000 per patient per year when it's patented. When the patent comes off, it can go down to, much closer to $100 per patient per year. So the Nobel Peace Prize winning group, Doctors Without Borders, is one of the many who've pointed out that this means much higher healthcare costs in developed countries, and in developing countries it just means longer periods of time where people cannot access life-saving generic medications. They call this the most harmful trade pact ever for access to medicines. Another major chapter that was leaked was the investment chapter. And what this shows is that the TPP would give transnational corporations the power to challenge virtually any government action that cuts into their expectation of profits. That could be a new law, a new regulation, a permitting decision, a court decision. If it cuts into their expectation of profits, what they expected to make when they made that investment, they can challenge that as an indirect expropriation and demand government compensation. The challenges are not heard through the U.S. court system or any country's domestic judicial system. They're heard by a private tribunal of trade attorneys, often corporate trade attorneys who represent Fortune 500 companies as their day jobs. And these tribunals, they can't literally force a country to change its policies, but they can award a judgment against a country that's worth millions and in some instances even billions of dollars. So if the country doesn't want additional challenges brought against it, it gets in line. And I'll give you just 2 examples of this because I know I'm running late on time. When the people of Ecuador finally won a multi-billion-dollar court judgment against Chevron to aid in the cleanup of the Amazon, the company turned to an investor state tribunal and had that judgment stayed in the hopes, obviously, of getting a future judgment that they don't have to pay it at all. In June of last year, the French firm Veolia even initiated a claim against the Egyptian government, arguing that increases to the Egyptian minimum wage are something that it needs to be compensated for. Okay, so anyone who's worked to get a law passed or to get a major infrastructure project approved, or saw a court case through to judgment, just imagine doing all that work and then having a corporation go to a private tribunal and getting it overturned. That's what the TPP would do. We do have we have a number of agreements that already have this process in place, but for the most part, with a couple of exceptions, they've been with small developing countries. And so it's mainly been big corporations from big countries smashing the sovereignty of small countries, which would obviously continue under the TPP, but with big capital exporting nations like Japan involved, the chickens could come home to roost, and we could see our own policies smashed as well. So that was sort of the quick version. Let me just really take one more minute to mention our paths to victory here, because I said at the start, we do have a successful track record of defeating corporate power grabs like this. We know how to do it, and I'll suggest, we really need to pursue a simple two-part strategy. First, we need to drag this agreement out of the shadows. We need to shine a spotlight on it. We need to make sure our members know about it, know about the impacts it could have on their lives, and that they're contacting their members of Congress. That will introduce a level of accountability to the negotiations. It'll make it a lot harder for them to cut the most heinous deals. Secondly, and most importantly, for those of us in the United States, we need to stop fast track. Fast track is a Nixon-era policymaking procedure that allows trade agreements to circumvent ordinary congressional review, amendment, and debate procedures. Simple trade agreements can pass Congress without fast track. Hundreds have, but these major corporate power grabs cannot pass without special consideration where they're rushed through. Fast track expired in 2007. It would need to be reapplied to apply to the TPP. The battle over fast track is in the House of Representatives. The vast majority of House Democrats are going to vote with us on this. A smaller number of House Republicans are going to vote with us. Some on principle, a few more because they've got maybe textiles in their district and have commercial concerns, and then an unknown number because they hate the president and they don't want to give him a win. We want to rely on as few Republican votes as possible, and that means getting as many Democratic votes as possible, each and every one we can get. And Kian is going to speak later on those members in New York who are still on the fence and who need your work. So let me just close by saying, number one, we've defeated fast track before, but the last time it was voted on, we lost by 2 votes. So let's do the work and save our members and working people throughout the world a world of hurt by getting Democrats to act like Democrats and side with constituents on this issue. Visit our website, follow us on Twitter and all that. Thank you.
I just want to say at the outset, the AFL-CIO has released the Executive Council statement earlier this year, which was very critical of the TPP, which Arthur referred to. We also had a resolution on it at our convention, which was just last month in Los Angeles. But the Federation has not taken an official position for or against the TPP at this point. All of the affiliates are not in line, so what we've been doing is working to educate people about it, educate people about the dangers, the prospects, because you can't have any kind of movement or public opinion about something if people don't even know what it is. So it's really important to figure out what this is, how it fits in with the rest of our economic policy, and decide for yourself what you want to do to avoid the worst possible outcomes. So this is the audience participation portion. What do you guys think is wrong with U.S. trade policy?
Everything.
Give an example.
Take all the jobs and throw them away.
Okay, so it sends jobs overseas. What else? Yes?
It's short-sighted.
Okay. Say why it's short-sighted.
Well, Well, it just, in a lot of situations, it sacrifices later for the now and for a short-term economic gain.
Okay, good, yes.
Favors multinationals and restricts government's democracy to make laws.
Absolutely, yes.
Undermines environmental and other regulations.
Absolutely.
Yes. The consultants September 12, 1993 Youth Conference, the bipartisan presidential Youth Conference, supported NAFTA for the reason that, let's go back there. That's where it started big time.
Okay, great. Yes, right? Socialize the losses, privatize the gains. Yes?
It seems like the leaders have numbers out to this. It's been training.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of a goal in and of itself. So let's see if we covered all of these things. We didn't talk so much about human rights or labor rights, but I think we got all the rest of it. And it really hasn't been good for any of those things and does definitely put profits over people. And sort of Walmart is kind of the example, because Walmart is oppressing workers in China with its demands for lower and lower priced products. It's oppressing its own employees here, and it really only exists because of, you know, what we mentioned about socializing its losses. It couldn't use its business model if it weren't for food stamps and Medicaid and all of these other things. So basically what we know from NAFTA onwards is that these type of trade agreements, they don't work, with a caveat. They work for about 1%. They do create gains, but the way our economic system is modeled, those gains are being captured by a tiny little group and they're not being shared. And the goal of the AFL-CIO right now, based on our convention, is to create shared prosperity. That means fair day's pay for a fair day's work. Everybody gets the benefits of the economy. What we found are job losses from the biggest trade agreements that we've been involved with so far. Almost 700 jobs lost to Mexico due to NAFTA, and 2.7 million jobs lost to China just as a result of China joining the WTO. That's what Arthur was talking about, China PNTR. Now, when you think about the job losses, don't imagine that it's the great job with a good salary and health benefits and a pension like the workers had when they worked in factories here that are just picked up and moved to Mexico. Nope, that job is sort of destroyed, gone poof. And what's created in Mexico is a sweatshop job where the workers are repressed, and if they have a union, it's likely to be a yellow union controlled by the management where the workers don't even know what's in their supposed collective bargaining agreement. This is just a list of jobs lost to China, and what I wanted to point out, people assume it's just manufacturing. That's really not the case. If you look at the items in red, it could cover what a lot of you folks do in the room and what your members do, because it's services as well. Of the 2.7 million jobs lost to China since it joined the WTO, 2.1 million are in manufacturing, which means 600,000 of those jobs are in services. And that's, you know, the next big move is call centers being sent off seas, x-rays being read on computer overseas, legal services being done online, any kind of service that you can think about, that can be offshore. Even construction jobs can be offshore. I was talking to IBEW members and they were saying that the companies are now importing whole walls that are pre-wired. So you don't need any electricians. You just put the walls together and poof, you've got the room or the building. Did you have a comment?
Contracting out of public services.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So I've got a few slides that are just to give you a graphic visual of what's happening in our economy. And these are all related to all neoliberal trade policy. So these effects are not just from trade, but trade certainly plays a big part of it. It's neoliberal tax policy. It's deregulation. It's the loss of real rights under the National Labor Relations Act, all of those things. So this shows you from 1947 to 1973, the yellow bars. Look how equal the growth in United States society was. And look which quintile had the greatest income growth. The poorest. That's exactly what you want, right? If you're creating a more equal society, the income of the poor has to grow faster than the income of the rich. That's how we want. That was the New Deal. That was the Civil Rights Act, right? That was the Equal Pay Act. All those things created that, a strong National Labor Relations Board which protected workers' rights. Yeah. After 73, it started the neoliberal trend and actually accelerated with the Reagan-Thatcher era, 1980, and then, of course, stepped on the gas with the Clinton-Bush NAFTA in 92 and has continued. So that's the red chart. You can see what has changed since the 70s. Not only is the top quintile growing more, but even that really is unequal because the top 0.1% and the top 0.1%, they're literally off the chart. We couldn't include, the chart would have been so small to include the full red line that it wouldn't have been understandable. And this is something everyone in this room knows. As union density shrinks, because unions lose bargaining power, because now we're competing with folks who make $38 a month, the middle class shrinks. Okay, this is key. I was over in Europe actually for 3 weeks. I just got back last Saturday working on a trade agreement that we are just starting with Europe. So it'll be this exact process. We're talking about the TPP, but with Europe. So there are some different things. With Europe, we're not talking about low-cost export platform and people who make $38 a month. But it's being sold to Europeans as, this is what's going to save us from the crisis. This is what's going to raise wages. Well, Europe is having the same problem we are. Wages are totally decoupled from productivity. So no matter if a trade agreement actually increases productivity, as the David Ricardo economic theory predicts, if workers can't capture any of those gains, what's the point? This is what we have to fix, is this decoupling of productivity and wages. Okay, so a new study by the Economic Policy Institute, EPI.org. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's not just job losses, it's wage suppression, because now we've got a global labor market where capital is looking to capture the lowest pay, the lowest rights, all of this. And what is $37 billion in wages due to our trade with China in just 1 year. So that's huge. So this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. So here's a question. What's wrong with all those Democrats who say to us as labor, we're with you, we're really with you on everything, but I'm sorry I have to vote for this trade agreement? That's how they should feel, right? Put a bag over their head, because a lot's really wrong with that, actually. So this is just a map of all the countries involved. You saw this in the video. And basically, Arthur went over this. I just wanted to add that the Obama administration, in terms of trade, is doing what I think the Bush administration did really well. And this is sort of this Orwellian language and stealing words. And do you guys remember healthy forests and clear skies and all of those things that were like pro-pollution and pro-cutting down trees? Well, the Obama administration stole our language. They talk about a new trade model. They talk about a 21st century trade agreement. They talk about high standards. But those don't mean the same thing when they talk about high standards. So just be careful of knowing what words mean when you hear them. Okay, so basically this just says it largely looks like NAFTA. They've added a few bells and whistles to make it look like the new model, but most of those new chapters that they're adding, they've told us, aren't really enforceable. So you can have a chapter on small and medium enterprises and say small and medium enterprises are going to really benefit from this deal. But unless you have somehow real rules that help small enterprises compete with Citibank and GE and Caterpillar and Walmart, it's not going to happen. It's just pretty words. So a couple of very specific things. Buy America, how many people are familiar with Buy America policies? Okay. So in our trade agreements from NAFTA forward, including at the WTO, we make these commitments called government purchasing commitments. And what they do is they obligate us to treat those trading partners as American companies for the purposes of Buy America legislation, unless they take a specific exception. So what the U.S. has taken specific exceptions for are basically federal highway projects and transit projects. So you can generally be assured if a highway project or a transit project is happening with federal money, it's American iron, it's American steel. However, you can have an example of California, which turned down federal money because they didn't want to buy American. They wanted to use a Chinese contractor with Chinese steel, so they didn't use federal money. When Buy American applies to other projects where we haven't taken exceptions, so building a new courthouse, building a new federal building, they can apply Buy American to it, but American will count as any country we have a free trade agreement with or any country that has signed the procurement agreement at the WTO. So what does that mean? You're trying to create jobs in your city, in your state, in the country, because our economy is really, really bad. Well, things are going really well in Australia, and Australia can come in and bid, and they can take all that money. So President Obama was actually criticized that about a third of his big stimulus bill, the American Reinvestment Recovery Act, went overseas. Well, it went overseas because we already have these commitments. So, and again, this impacts not just construction projects or buying paper or buying equipment, but it affects services contracts. So if you have a government that's actually outsourcing rather than insourcing and providing a service with public employees, you still at least could capture those jobs for US workers, potentially, if your state has a policy of Buy New York or Buy America. But if New York signs up to the TPP, and the TPP contains these provisions, what it means is the Australian, New Zealand, Vietnamese, Malaysian, Chilean, whatever, all those companies can compete equally. So those jobs, especially if they're call center jobs, helping folks get social services, they can be gone. So in terms of employment, are people familiar with the concept of state-owned enterprises? So this is where the government owns all or a portion of a particular business. Doesn't happen a lot in the United States unless you're talking about public services, like the New York Transit Authority. It's really, really common in most other countries and very common in Asian countries. And they compete commercially. So if you're talking about a large Chinese telecom company, a large Chinese steel company, electronics, they're often actually totally owned or partially owned by the Chinese government. So they can compete differently. The Chinese government can say you don't pay taxes. You get a loan which you don't have to pay back, or you get a loan with a 1% interest rate. Or you get your inputs to build your widget discounted or free from this other state-owned enterprise. So they can really compete unfairly and drive, private companies that have to pay the market cost of capital and the market cost of wages and the market cost of inputs out of business. And it's not that countries shouldn't have the right to be involved in their own economies. The problem for American workers comes if those state-owned enterprises come invest on American soil and set up shop down the street from a US company and purposely, compete in a predatory way to drive the competitors out of business. Because you will end up, if that happens, with one of two things. You have a monopsony, like a single buyer for labor then, just the state-owned enterprise, because they've driven everybody else out of business, or they drive the American companies out of business, and then they take their money and pack up and go home and take the jobs back to the country they came from, and then we've got a whole devastated sector. So there should be rules to cover that don't tell countries how to run their economy, but do set rules for fair competition. Public services. So a lot of people think, well, my job's safe because you can't trade it away. That's not true anymore. You certainly can trade it away. Number one, when we lose manufacturing, who's paying the property taxes for that factory anymore? Perhaps nobody. That's a loss of revenue. What happens to all those workers who either have no jobs or lesser jobs? Well, that's lost revenue for income taxes. In addition, we talked about how the government services can be outsourced and competed overseas. So there are lots of ways. If you're cutting government revenue, government's going to say, oh, austerity, let's cut public service workers, let's do furloughs, let's get rid of the pensions. All these things that are already happening can happen more. So government investment, we're going to see more of what we've seen, which is just fewer projects, because there's this real push for the sequester, the austerity. Until we get more money flowing to our government, we're going to have less investment, and that's bad for construction folks. So jobs and wages, basically, you guys know this stuff. Wages go down, you lose jobs. There's all kinds of ways that this can happen. I'm just going to try and wrap up here. Japan in particular. So Japan, in theory, this is the kind of country we want to trade with. High wages, about double the union density that we have. You'd think this would be a good thing. The problem is it's hard to get U.S. exports into the Japanese market, and we've had a problem trading with them all the way back. Anyone that was around in the 80s remembers Reagan was actually pretty good on trade issues with Japan and got them to agree to voluntary export restraints. Said, we're going to slap tariffs on your vehicles unless you stop sending so many to the U.S., and it was helpful to the U.S. car companies. Problem is, there was no WTO then. You can't do that now. You can't threaten Japan with higher tariffs. So if they're in the deal and we just zero out all tariffs, we're going to have even more Japanese exports to the U.S., which is fine. But again, if we can't get equivalent exports to Japan, that's a problem for U.S. jobs. Okay, so I was at one of these negotiating rounds that I've talked about, and I stood up and I was trying to ask them an easy question. Again, remembering the AFL-CIO hasn't taken a position. We're looking for what's going to be good in the agreement for workers. So I said, okay, I know you guys are doing a labor chapter, but what else? Nothing. There were all the chief negotiators on the panel, and they sort of were silent, and then they giggled, and then they were silent, and then they giggled some more. It was really kind of creepy. And finally, the Malaysian negotiator said, you know, well, we are working hard to protect our indigenous population. And then they moved to the next question. So anyway, so these are the sticky negotiating issues. They haven't completed them yet. Obviously, the state-owned enterprises, but the environmental chapter, the intellectual property issues Arthur touched on. And it's not just with medicines. Think about this. If anybody saw the New York Times article, I think it was 2 Sundays ago, how the US system basically allows patents to stay patents forever. Nothing comes off patent because what the companies do is make a different kind of inhaler for your asthma medicine or change it from a liquid gel to a cap, and they get a brand new patent. And they want to put these rules on other countries. Okay, you know what's at stake if we get this wrong. 2 more things. I already talked about the European agreement. There's also an agreement called the TISA, the Trade and International Services Agreement for public service folks. This is potentially a threat if it doesn't protect public services. The Europeans are kind of going crazy about this, and we need to be more involved here. Brothers and sisters have to work together. And then here's just a bunch of things. There's a Delora letter on fast track that Arthur was talking about. You can write your legislators and ask to see the text. So there's lots of ways to be involved. We've got a petition. If you watch that video that you saw at the very end of it, there's a petition. If you go to the site aflcio.org/fair-TPP, there's a petition, and it basically goes to the lead trade minister from every country, all 12 countries, and it says, we don't want a trade agreement that doesn't protect workers, create jobs, make medicines affordable, protect the environment, and get rid of this investor-state process. So it's aflcio.org, so that's just a general site, and then /fair dash or hyphen, so the short one, TPP. So fair-TPP. And I think that's basically it. I just want to go back briefly to the title. So the title I put, you know, the TPP, you know, NAFTA 2, bigger and badder question mark. Like what we wanted, if anybody remembers when Obama was running for president, he said, let's renegotiate NAFTA. So in a way, he's like fulfilling his campaign promise, right? Because this is NAFTA +9. But the question is, we wanted better. Are we going to get better or are we going to get badder? You know, I don't want to view like this as the Terminator was bad, the Terminator 2 was meaner, you know, Godzilla was bad, Godzilla 2 was meaner. So it's really up to us to like take control and figure out what's happened and what's our fate as workers. Thanks for listening.
Morning, everybody. My name's Kian, Frederick. I'm the New York State Director for the Citizens Trade Campaign. And my job, I guess, is to give you the good news after all this bad news. And that is that there is something we can do to stop this right now. And that is stopping fast track. And Arthur discussed it briefly. Fast track is the Achilles heel of this whole thing. It's the sneaky way that they want to slide this through. Fast track is a procedural move in Congress where Congress literally gives up its constitutional authority to regulate trade with foreign nations. Article 1, Section 8. And they give it up to the executive branch. And as Arthur mentioned, this it was invented by Nixon in the 1970s. So we had a good system that worked for 200 years, and then Nixon, Tricky Dick, came up with this system. And since he came up with it, about 200 trade deals have been negotiated the good old-fashioned way, and only 16 have been needed to be fast-tracked, and those are all the bad ones. So fast-track is for bad trade agreements that they don't want anybody to see. And what happens, for example, with the TPP, is it gets negotiated, it's a done deal, and Congress has already voted to give up its authority. The TPP comes to Congress, they get to vote yes or no, up or down, and they can't change anything, they can't amend anything, there's no committee process, none of that stuff. So it keeps the secrecy. And the U.S. Trade Representative has already said that he wants to keep the text of the TPP secret for 4 years until after it's approved. So, yeah, hello, I know, if you're looking at me like, where's your tinfoil hat? This is America. Yeah, well, that's what they want to do if we let them get away with it. But the good news is that New York State rocks, let me just tell you. So in the past couple of months, as I said, I'm new here, so when I first started in this position, we only had 2 people who had signed on to something called the DeLauro letter. Rosa DeLauro is a representative of Congress from Connecticut. Many of you know her, very good friend to labor, very good friend to environmental activists and all that. And she has sponsored a letter to the president which simply says, there's a lot of secrecy here, and we're the Congress people that are supposed to be in charge of this trade deal thing, and you're not telling us anything. So you know what, Mr. President? We're going to vote against fast track, and we're going to do it the slow track, old-fashioned way, like the old fogies who wrote the Constitution said we should. So we're picking the founders of the Constitution over Tricky Dick's system, sir. And so when I started, we had 2 representatives who had signed on. And I'm happy to say we currently have 15 signed on, plus there's a letter that the Republicans are doing, and we have 2 of our 6 Republicans signed on. So we are very proud to say that we have a bipartisan majority of our New York State congressional delegation opposed and publicly committed to voting no on fast track. So that's a very good thing. And very briefly, the way we did it was thinking strategically about the power that we had. We know that we're up against a lot of, obviously, corporate power, but also political power because we're talking about Democrats, and their Democratic president is going to be calling them. So we really exploited, in a very good way, the raw power of constituency. And you see the results in just a couple of months, right? Weeks, really. And so many people came together, yes, labor, but community groups, all that. I want to point to Susan Metz, who from Clark's district, from the Park Slope Food Co-op, God bless. And yes, and she led her delegation of constituents. And they met, she opened her house, and we did this across the city. And throughout the state. Folks met, they educated themselves, they understood the process, they understood their role. We're going to sit there, we're going to look our rep in the eye, and we're going to say, what are you going to do about this? And it worked. So we're continuing to organize. Susan, you have an event coming up on the 13th of December, I'm sorry. Yep, there we go. So
Food Co-op voted 16,100
that's right.
members. We sent letters to all New York City Congress members saying vote no on fast track. And we will have monthly open meetings, popular education and organizing to expose the TPP and to discuss strategy. The first one is the
13th of December. 13th.
Yeah. And the second is Friday, January 10th. They're open to non-members. It's in central Brooklyn. Please come. I have flyers.
So what we're doing now that we've pretty much got everybody is we're moving into the organized rapid response stage, because the fast track vote is coming up in the next couple of weeks, couple of months. The administration the U.S. Trade Representative just said, we want fast track as soon as possible. And let's be clear, the fast track vote is going to happen before the vote on the TPP. So we like to say, educate yourself on the TPP, focus on fast track, because that's the only way. If we deny and fast track, we win the fast track vote, that we drag this thing out into the open and it goes through the regular committee process, and it will not survive that. That's the only way to stop it. So we're continuing to organize where folks have signed on. The job for you guys, and I'm going to pass this around and ask you to sign up if you'd like to receive more information and about what's happening here in New York, in the city. We have a couple of holdouts. You'll be surprised perhaps to learn there's 6 of them left. Our top targets are Charlie Rangel, who has said, I will vote against fast track. I believe in slow track. Well, good. We need you to sign on to the Deloro letter, sir. Also Congresswoman Lowy, Congressman Engel, if you live in Co-op City, give him a call. And upstate Congressman Owens are the people that are left out, and Congressman Crowley, who we don't think is going to sign. He's kind of a free trader, but call him. And sadly, Congressman Meeks is not only pro-fast track, supportive of the TPP, he is one of the leaders of the TPP caucus in the House. So his job is to go around and kind of schmooze these folks, even the ones that have signed on to the Deloro letter. We're continuing to organize because we know that, hey, they can change their vote. I didn't know if you knew that, right? At the last minute. So we're going to keep the pressure on. So those are the folks that we need some help with. And then specifically, if you really want to get out there, on Monday, at 68th and Park from 10:30 to noon, we're having just a little leafleting action. We're having a visitor, a Representative Schwartz, who's on the Ways and Means Committee, very important person to have signed the Deloro letter, who has refused so far. And she's coming to a fundraiser in New York City, as they always do. And she thinks she can hide from her constituents in Pennsylvania, but we're going to be there for our brothers and sisters. We invite you to join us, 68th and Park, 10:30 to noon next Monday. And if you sign up there, I will shoot you a little email. We don't share any of that. That's just, and I don't drive people crazy with emails because I'm too busy to do it. But I'll send you that information. Plus, I'll send you a nice one-pager for this. That's easy to talk about. Yes, sir.
This is the one who's running for governor?
Yeah, she is, right? Right there? She's running for governor. Yeah.
Can you quickly say something about the largest single caucus in Congress, separate of the two parties, are the progressives, and yet they never get any traction, and their unity is the problem?
Well, I'm not a political analyst, and I would probably want to defer to you and others in the group, but I will say that certainly for New York State, right, and really for progressives, beating back fast track is not only the key to beating and winning the TPP and the other trade agreements that are coming down the pike that were spoken about, but it's a real punch in the nose to these corporate folks that think that they can steamroll and just keep bringing these crazy things, and it's a real builder for the Progressive Caucus. So thank you very much.
Recently in New York, we've had a couple of experiences with organizing, to win things, like Letitia James, who was not supported by any of the newspapers, and so on. And between labor and grassroots groups, she was elected. Now, also we got one of our Congress people to change his vote on a war thing, just a few people. So I have a question. What's stopping the AFL-CIO from telling Congress people that if you don't vote against fast track, we'll not vote for you?
So my question to you was, I heard nothing about Codex Alimentarius within TPP, which I think is really important to discuss, as well as the like resurgence of the dreaded SOPA, PIPA, CISPA, you know, whatever you want to call it, mess. So could you guys talk a little bit about those and how they affect us? Because I heard something, and it's becoming really difficult for people, including educated people, to know what's right and what's wrong nowadays. So so yeah, I've been like trying to figure out like Codex Alimentarius and what it's really about. And I've heard of things as ridiculous as it makes vitamins toxins, and like at some point, you know, like it'll be like a highly controlled substance. So I don't know, that sounds like conspiracy theory to me, but like the stuff that they shovel to us is, yeah, so anyway.
Yeah, this question would be addressed to the folks from Citizen Trade and AFL-CIO. I attended an event yesterday at Columbia University where the head economist of the ILO was there, David Von Whitehead, and one of the things that he passed out were these studies that he did of the effects of the austerity measures in Europe. And I was stunned at, you know, we're generally aware of what is going on in Italy, Portugal, and Spain, and Greece, but it was across the board. There was a study called Public Shock, which unfortunately is not available on the web, which detailed every single country in the EU with serious several-year austerity measure depreciations of every aspect of the social fabric that people have generally associated with Europe. So I want you to talk about that. What's your take on that? Because you mentioned, one of you mentioned this EU trade agreement. We're talking about across-the-board cuts with GDP drops in practically every country in Europe. In the past couple of years, but especially in the past 2 years.
All right, thanks. So let's go back to the panel.
So I'll start with the AFL-CIO answers, and I'll start with your question on fast track. I mean, we don't believe that these issues are often as simple as black or white or yes or no, and that's one of the reasons we haven't come out officially supporting or opposing the TPP altogether yet. Because we're still working on trying to get the USTR and the administration and members of Congress to push hard to change it so that it's not the same NAFTA model, so that it's going to be different. The minute that we come out with the position against it, the auto workers are not going to be asked to be in the room to talk about auto issues. The steel workers are not going to be asked to be in the room to talk about rules of origin and state-owned enterprises. So it's really important to either, I mean, there's a lot of things. This could happen, it doesn't get stopped, it's really awful, and we lose a lot of jobs and it destroys the economy forever. This could happen, and it's not that awful, and there are some things, some accomplishments we can get in it, or it can be totally stopped. We think that the latter two are much better than the first one, and not working on the content at all is a problem and is counterproductive. Same with fast track. We're actually working with Senator Sherrod Brown, who's probably the single best advocate of fair trade policies, manufacturing. I could just talk like this. You know, for workers in the entire United States Congress, on writing an alternative bill and saying this is the process and it's going to be more open and it's going to be more democratic, and Congress will have an opportunity when the bill is brought back, if it doesn't achieve the goals, to say it does deserve fast track benefits or it doesn't deserve fast track benefits. And we don't think that it's really productive to tell everybody now, vote no, when you don't know what the bill is going to look like. So, pardon me? Well, if a fast track bill is introduced and it's the bad fast track, we will tell people to vote no on it. But as I said, we're working on what's the content of the bill, so we're not going to tell people how to vote yet because we haven't seen it. So with regard to your question about food safety, I'm not aware of the Codex being involved at all. The problem with the food safety chapter, the SPS, is that what it does is it basically tells countries these are the kinds of food safety regulations you can or cannot have, and it locks those in forever. So if the rules say you can't have, for instance, labeling on genetically modified foods, or you can't have labeling on country of origin, or you can't do...
That you
it wouldn't mandate that you have to, but it would say you couldn't, it would, yeah, that I don't think is realistic, but these are the kinds of rumors that you get when the text is secret, because nobody really knows. What it could do is say, you can't ban the use of antibiotics, and that kind of, rather than saying that you must use it. But these are legitimate questions that you need to ask your elected officials about what's going on in that chapter. And then finally, with regard to the austerity question, the ILO and the TUAC, the Trade Union Advisory Council to the OECD, they've done a lot of studies, and they know that austerity doesn't work. And still, the IMF is pushing it just the way they pushed restructuring on developing countries in the 80s and the 90s. And they know that it doesn't work. But again, these institutions, the European Central Bank, the IMF, they're run by the 1%. And what's happening in Europe in particular is that the big industrial countries, Germany and the Nordics, are doing a pretty good job of keeping their workers safe from the negative effects of austerity, so that they're not seeing the response against it in their countries while they impose austerity on the European South and the European East and places like Ireland. I was in Ireland for a day while I was there, and they've done a study, and because the austerity measures imposed on Ireland amount to $9,000 per person. That's the cost that they're paying for their austerity measures. So one of the things that is getting the workers in the European trade unions excited is to make sure that this EU-US trade agreement, if it happens, doesn't enshrine austerity. And it's important to do that, but that means, like, how's it going to treat taxes? And if it allows companies to treat taxes as something they can challenge under this investor-state dispute settlement process, then it's a problem. Folks might not know, but Australia, during the crisis, was maybe going to do a windfall profits tax, and the foreign invested mining companies said, if you do that, we're going to sue, because taxing us, giving us a windfall profit tax, is taking away our expected profits. So the tax was never imposed. So these are the kind of things you have to look out for in the agreement. I don't know if other folks want to address any of those questions.
You know, I could just say on the food safety issue, you know, the TPP does have what's called the sanitary and phytosanitary standards chapter. It's the food safety chapter. Our coalition has always argued, you know, trade agreements should set a floor on food safety standards, below which no country can go, but if a community wants stronger standards, they should be able to impose it. Corporations take the opposite view, that, you know, they should use the Codex Alimentarius and other, you know, bodies to set a cap on food safety standards above which no community can go. That's wrong, and that's what these trade agreements do. And, you know, in terms of particular, you know, we need to do more research.
Also, a way for, sorry to interrupt, but a way for other countries to, what was the word you guys used, dock? Isn't that like they will be forced into the trade agreement, because if there's a dispute between two nations, the one that is compliant with the TPP will automatically win the dispute?
Yeah, so docking means that other countries who aren't currently involved can join at a later time, and, you know, some countries will choose to do so voluntarily, other countries, you know, might be encouraged to join in the future. But you know, only the countries who are eventually sign up for the pact, were it to be enacted, you know, would be bound by it.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly add, this is why these panels can be interesting, because I work also directly with Public Citizen Global Trade Watch, who is flat out opposed to fast track. So we may disagree slightly in that we don't think there's any fixing fast track, right? It's Congress giving up their constitutional authority, and there's no reason for it, because if we go through the regular process, many agreements do. So we're flat out opposed to it.
Okay. All right, I had this gentleman, and this woman, and then we're going to go back to the panel again.
Thank you very much. My name is Eric Weltman. I work with Food and Water Watch, a nonprofit consumer organization that's helping lead the fight against fracking here in New York and that opposes fast track. I want to thank the Murphy Institute for hosting this really, really incredible forum. A couple quick things. First of all, we actually have some fact sheets over in the corner about how TPP would both promote fracking as well as undermine food safety laws and regulations, so you might want to take note of those. A question, I noted a lot of concerning things in your remarks. One, that this agreement would be a gift to Big Pharma. I'm wondering if anyone knows where Partners in Health stands on the issue. Partners in Health, as folks may know, is a very notable and renowned health organization, amongst whose one of their founders is now president of the World Health Organization. So it might be very interesting to have Paul Farmer take a position on the TPP, because that in turn potentially could influence the head of the World Bank. And then one other quick thing. I know we're focusing on targeting our legislators, but I will note that President Obama is going to be in town tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock for a fundraiser. Folks, sorry, this afternoon, so at 3 o'clock in Brooklyn, so if folks want to go say hello, certainly do so.
Good morning. As a new labor leader, I was very surprised to hear that Meeks was actually from New York, given his support by union labor to be where he's at, to see him sitting on this actually as a proponent of the secret trade agreement. And I'm actually surprised that the AFL-CIO is taking such a lukewarm position on this, because we are the last bastion of the labor movement. And to have somebody from our town take that position doesn't bode well for the labor movement in New York, if this thing was to go. And like anything else, I think shedding a light brings everything to the surface. We can always have a seat at the table, but if we don't have a voice at the table, why sit at the table?
Yeah, I like that.
Meeks has a long-standing position on trade. One, he believes in these international trade agreements. Two, and I'll give you an example of why it's difficult for a body like AFL-CIO to come to a quick position on this. On the China trade agreement, the national unions were hammering Meeks in Washington to come out against it. The local unions who worked at the airport were hammering Meeks to support it. And there was $2 billion worth of work at stake. People don't realize, but on trade in New York, congressmen adjacent to the airports, those are the largest point of entries for goods for the city. So there's a lot of countervailing pressures. But, I mean, the key with Meeks is local unions with members in the districts hammering him through Flake's church.
Yes.
So that he hears it someplace other than the union hall. But he is ideologically in agreement with these international trade things. And frankly, this is the other problem. I'll be very quick. This is a guy who gets elected with 90% plus. So he comes to the labor movement as a young congressman and says, look, I want to get to leadership. I need to raise money. No political directors throwing a whole bunch of bucks to a Democratic congressman in New York City that's going to win with 90%. So who did he turn to? He turned to business. Bam, they bankrolled. So we've got to remember that the labor movement is not of one mind on these issues. And on NAFTA, the public sector unions across the board said, we're not spending any political capital to fight it. Maybe because of the service provisions in this one, they will. But it's same piece with Charlie Rangel. He will get cover from some of the local organizations. So we got to, I just wanted to, people talk about, labor not doing this, not doing that. It is a very diverse body of people with very different interests. And if they can get to a point where they can oppose fast track in any form, it would be a breakthrough.
Okay, I have one last question, and then we'll go back to the panel.
Hello. This is actually, this is actually more of a announcement than a question per se. So yes, my name is Wendy Scher. I'm from Trade Justice New York Metro. We're kind of a regional coalition of groups working to fight these exploitative trade agreements. And so what we've been doing is organizing volunteers in various electoral districts throughout the city and region. And a lot of the way we've been doing that is having these petitions that you've probably seen at a lot of events to oppose the TPP and fast track. And so we're collecting volunteers and organizing through various districts, like Susan Metz, who's been working with us and doing a lot of good work, and a lot of people in this room. So we're going to pass around a lot of these petitions, and I hope you also sign up to volunteer, because we could definitely use the help. And we also have some flyers about immigration and labor that we'll also send to you. So thank you, and we hope to see you helping us out and helping each other more in the future.
Okay, so we're going to go, I'm running off to class, I'm handing this to Paula Finn, and then we'll turn this to our backup panel for answers to this question. So let's
Well,
go back.
Let's start on the health.
Yeah.
I'll just make the point, I mean, the question about partners in health is a great one. I'm not aware if they've spoken out on the TPP yet. I know Paul Farmer and a lot of people over there have been fighting corporate globalization for many, many years. I can say, again, Doctors Without Borders, Health Gap, even recently AARP have all been warning about the public health implications of the TPP. And again, the reason why all these groups have come out in the public health advocacy sector is because that happens to be one of the few chapters that's leaked. It's very hard when you don't have text to go in and show to an organization or show to a reporter, show to a congressional staffer to just say, well, trust us, we know what's in there. They want to see the text for themselves. And since that chapter leaked, the public health sector has been very, very outspoken. I mean, lots of mainstream public health groups have, raised really big red flags.
Yeah, and I would just add, just this week, AFSCME and the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, folks may have heard of that organization, co-hosted in Washington, D.C., a briefing specifically for health groups, again, expanding the reach of this where it's not just labor talking, specifically on the medicine and health issues, because the patent issues is a really big deal. 12 years of data exclusivity for the biologic drugs. These are all sort of the brand new drugs that you see the ads for on TV, breakthroughs on cancer and psoriasis and all of these other things. They're not made in the way traditional drugs are. They're created by, little life form bacteria, other things. Keeping it secret how it's made for 12 years, totally separate from the patent process, delays generic competition even further. So it's an added item. Now that's the law in the US right now. That's what came with the Affordable Care Act. But the president's budget also said, I want to change it to 5 years, make it more reasonable to promote competition. But if that's the rule that gets into the TPP, it locks in that 12 years for the United States and all the other countries and any countries that dock on pretty much forever. Because to date, we haven't really gone back and renegotiated these agreements like we were promised with NAFTA. So folks are getting involved there. And then I just want to take issue with the notion that the AFL-CIO is lukewarm on anything. I mean, I don't think, if you saw my presentation, that we were lukewarm on the fact that we are totally opposed to losing jobs, having wages suppressed, losing the power of Buy America, opposing investor-state dispute settlement, any of these things. And we've been very clear about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in a trade agreement. Because the Federation and I'm sorry I didn't get your name, but I think the gentleman who, Ed, thank you. We've got 57 affiliates who work in all kinds of sectors and do all kinds of things and are trying to accomplish as much as they can in whatever sectors that they can. And those, I don't make policy for the AFL-CIO, and certainly even, President Trump doesn't personally. There's 57 presidents to deal with. So we're all clear on what we want. It's just, how the approach to getting there. And I think that we are working hard. President Trump has talked to President Obama personally about this. They know where the AFL-CIO is going to be if the agreement doesn't look the way that we've demanded that it looks. And similarly with the trade authority process, we've been very clear on what can't be in it, what must be in it. We are working to accomplish good things for workers. And I think that we are going about it tooth and nail. Folks might agree or disagree with our strategies or our methods, but I don't think anything about it is lukewarm, and we are fighting for good things for workers. So.
And I'll just second that myself. I mean, we work with Celeste a lot. Our coalition, 23-member organization, has a lot of unions within and without the AFL. And unless there's any confusion on the DeLauro letter, I mean, the AFL helped Congresswoman DeLauro craft that. They've written, they've been working it. We're working together on this stuff.
Yeah, I'm happy to say what's different and what's not and what we disagree with, but, there should be no misunderstanding on my part. I don't think that, the AFL is, we're not, look, let's be clear. It's too easy to bash the AFL, right, in the progressive movement. I think they're great. I think they do a lot of good things, but they are, a group of differing individuals and different leaders. And if you're a member of a union, you don't want your guy going off and selling off the store. You want them there representing you. But I want to remind folks here that what I was talking about earlier when we went, we added and we met with and organized and met with all of those reps and they all signed on to the DeLauro letter, we did that with folks like this in this room, right? And it's no diss to the AFL. I mean, God bless them, right? But we didn't sit around waiting for the AFL to decide what to do. It was unions, it was CWA, it was IBT, it was some of the building trades, IBEW. It was also grassroots groups, community groups, fractivist people, food people, I call them. Forgive me, I am a daughter of labor, so I say food people, environmental people, and I mean no disrespect, but, a fantastic coalition of people. And that's our responsibility, that's our responsibility to talk to each other and to figure out what we can do together and what not. And, so I just put it out there like that. I think we should say what our differences are so that we're clear, and you're clear where we're coming from, but no one's here to bash anybody, and I only speak with respect to folks. So.
By the way, with no disrespect, I am Vice President of PEF. I'm affiliated with AFL-CIO. But the unions have to take responsibility for our own actions. And at times, we're our own worst enemies.
I wanted to know if there was a place on the website where we could see what they're asking for. I was just curious.
Every trade agreement, certainly since NAFTA, has promised jobs. All of them have lost jobs. I'm interested in the labor chapter. In particular, does it say anything about the responsibility of the trading countries to create jobs? That was the original of the draft of immediate post-World War II.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak a bit to the NAFTA Quebec fracking case and the implication, what the prospects are for that case and what the implications are for TPP with so many more countries being broadened, particularly Japan, the largest importer of liquid natural gas.
I mean, if the House of Labor is divided, I mean, there has to be a certain majority of unions that agree to it for the Federation to take a position on it. But which unions are in what spaces? Who's favoring this at this point? Who's not decided? Who's against it?
Okay, so on our website, if you go to, again, AFL-CIO.org and then go /issues/trade, that'll take you to our trade homepage, and you can see there will be a subpage for the TPP, where you can look at, spelling out the dangers and what we'd like to see better. Also, the other agreements that I mentioned, the Europe one. But the best place to see our positive vision for what we are demanding in trade is through our resolution from the convention. And I believe it's resolution number 12. But you'll see it's called America and the world need a new trade model. And we go through what the labor, environmental, regulatory, investment, procurement, state-owned enterprise, all of these provisions should be. We don't just deal in one chapter, we deal in all of those. Secondly, in terms of the House of Labor, I wouldn't say there's a division. I don't know of any of our affiliates at this point have come out for the agreement. I don't know that any of them will. We will have to see in the past, for example, like with Korea, the auto workers actually supported Korea. So, and I'm not predicting anything, but certainly it's possible. Also with Korea, when UFCW wasn't an affiliate, they supported Korea. Now, they are an affiliate, so there are obviously going to be questions, but nobody supports it right now. The steelworkers have not taken a position. I believe, and folks can correct me if I'm wrong, but I can tell you unions that have talked very strongly against it, and whether or not they've passed an official resolution, they're saying, like, basically that they oppose it, and that the machinists, CWA, IBEW have been the most active. But again, it's not really that there's division, it's just that all the affiliates haven't come to President Trump and say, the Federation needs to oppose it now. And I think I don't particularly see a way where that won't eventually happen, but we are working and we're pushing and we'll see. And then you had the question about the labor chapter. So we have said these agreements have to be centered around creating good jobs. And if you remember the chart from my presentation where productivity goes up and wages stay flat, just creating sort of economic efficiencies or economic productivity is not the same as creating jobs. And it doesn't tell you where any jobs that might be created would be created or whether those jobs would be paid fairly or be given fair benefits. But we have said there ought to be a job creation chapter. We haven't heard any public information that there is. We don't have any information that the labor chapter will do anything regarding jobs. We believe it will look largely like the sort of May 2007, the last labor chapter that we had. But USTR has talked publicly about trying to improve it, make it better. We are hopeful that they can achieve that. They are negotiating for a stronger labor chapter with Vietnam, which has no free and independent trade unions. Vietnam has not signed off, so they're negotiating with folks who don't necessarily believe in international labor rights. So I don't know what they'll be able to achieve. Assuming the U.S. can get a better labor chapter, that's great. That'll be a step in the right direction. It won't necessarily create or save any jobs, and it won't necessarily be enough for any of the AFL-CIO's affiliates to say, great, this is a great agreement now. You need these things to fight the race to the bottom, but they're not the same as, the labor chapter is not the same as a positive inclusion. So it's sort of a minimum requirement, but it's not sufficient grounds to really be supportive and say it's a good agreement. So I think that's my answers, and Arthur's going to talk about fracking.
Yeah, so just to, number one, to be clear, so we're a coalition. We've got environmental groups in our coalition who oppose fracking. We've got unions in our coalition who represent workers in the gas industry. We don't have a position for or against fracking as CTC. I will say, just in terms of the information, no one in our coalition supports climate change. I will say, in terms of what the TPP would do on fracking, it's pretty clear. And it involves two issues. Number one, Japan is already, the largest importer of natural gas. Natural gas prices in Japan are, I forget the multiplier, but many, many times higher than they are in the United States. So, the businesses that are extracting natural gas by fracking want to sell it not to, lower energy costs in the United States, but to sell it where they're going to get the most money, which is Asia. And there's a provision in the Natural Gas Act, U.S. domestic law, that says that any country with which we have a free trade agreement exports of natural gas to that country are automatically deemed in the U.S. national interest, and so they're exempt from the normal economic and environmental impact review. So that's one part. And then the other part, as I mentioned in terms of the investment chapter, already under NAFTA, there's a company that Adam, referred to called Lone Pine, which is suing under NAFTA's investor-to-state provisions to challenge Quebec's fracking moratorium, calling that an indirect expropriation and saying they need to be compensated, I think $250 million, or is it $500 million? An obscene amount of money.
One thing I want to say about investor-state dispute settlement, this, and I think that AFL-CIO has been pretty clear. It's potentially the most destructive of all the terms in these free trade agreements. And on my slide show, I mentioned Veolia earlier. It's the company that's challenging the increase in minimum wages in Egypt. Well, they already operate in the United States. Was anyone following the Boston bus drivers strike? Okay, Veolia is the company that they drive for. So they don't work for Boston Public Schools. They work for Veolia, which has that outsourced contract. So this is a French company, a huge, huge conglomerate, and mostly what they do is public services, take across countries, and they already operate throughout the United States, and this is a company that would gain that power to sue under ISDS, under like a US-EU trade agreement. And you can think of these companies everywhere. Under the TPP, a bunch of big Australian mining conglomerates would get that same right. And I have a quote, I don't have the woman's name in my head, it's in my notes, but she's like this billionaire mining mogul in Australia. And she said, the things that come out of people's mouths publicly when they aren't sure people are listening. She was talking about Australian miners need to be more competitive because we can mine in South Africa for $2 a day per person. So like she's advocating that Australian miners make $2 a day. These are the things that these folks say, and these are the companies that are going to be making decisions about what to sue the United States for. So these are the kinds of things.
Just one small difference between NAFTA, the NAFTA investor state provisions, and these investors, this is the foundation of the whole thing, right? But between NAFTA and what's proposed in the TPP is that under NAFTA, if I'm a global corporation and I want to sue another company, another country that's in I have to go to my government and say, will you file a trade sanction against these people? Under the current proposed TPP provision, they don't need to do that. They're going to skip the government. They get to take the Express A train straight to the secret WTO tribunals, right?
Not
Yeah.
NAFTA, but the WTO, yeah.
Yeah, right. I'm sorry. Yeah. So we're, it's forget the government. They just get to go straight, and then they're going to stand there in front of these corporate attorneys who are playing judges for 3 months. Then they rotate out and go and defend the corporations. And they're going to go and be equal to someone who's defending a Supreme Court decision or a law that our elected representatives make. So you're going to guess who wins.
Okay, we're going to end now, but we always invite people to stick around and engage with the speakers. I want to thank
You guys sit up there.
our speakers.